The land was empty and wide, stretching like an endless sea of sand and stone. The sun burned from above and the wind carried only dust. No bird, no tree, no water could be seen. Only silence followed the man who walked slowly with his horse. He was a lonely rider, a traveler with tired eyes. His clothes were torn from long journeys. His boots carried the dust of many forgotten paths. The horse at his side was thin, its steps heavy. Together they had survived storms, hunger, and long nights without fire. But now, even the horse was weak, breathing hard with every step. The man knew this was his last horse, the only companion left in a world that felt broken and quiet. He touched the horse's neck gently, whispering to it like an old friend. They had come far together, but he did not know if they would reach another sunrise. The rider's eyes searched the horizon, always hoping, always afraid. Sometimes he thought he saw shapes moving in the heat, shadows of people or creatures watching from afar. But when he blinked, there was nothing, only the endless desert. As the day grew older, the heat pressed harder against his skin. His throat was dry and every breath hurt. He looked at the horse and knew it was suffering too, yet still they walked, step by step, into the unknown. Then, something strange caught his eye. Near a broken line of rocks, there was a shape. At first, he thought it was only another trick of the sun, a mirage. But as he moved closer, the shape did not disappear. It grew clearer, sharper, until he could see it was a body lying in the sand. The rider stopped, his hand resting on the horse's side. His heart beat faster. Who could be here in such a place, so far from any road or village? He hesitated, for danger could hide in many forms. Yet curiosity pulled him closer, step by step. The body was small, fragile, not like a grown warrior, the skin way, as pale with a strange glow. The clothes were torn and strange, unlike any he had seen. And then he saw the face. It was not the face of a human. The rider froze, his breath caught in his chest. The figure was a girl, but not from his world. Her ears were long and thin, her eyes closed but glowing faintly under the lids. Her body trembled weakly, as if caught between life and death. The rider knelt beside her. He did not know what she was or where she came from, but he could see the wound on her side, blood dark against her clothes. She was hurt, badly, and had no strength to move. For a long moment, he stared, torn between fear and pity. This was no ordinary traveler. She was something else, something from the stars, perhaps. He had heard stories told by old soldiers, stories of beings not human, but he had never believed, until now, the desert around him was still silent. But the silence felt different now, heavy, alive, as if the very air waited for his choice. The horse shook its head, uneasy, sensing the strangeness. The rider touched its neck again, trying to calm it. His own mind was not calm. A voice inside him whispered to leave her, to save himself and walk away. But another voice, deeper, stronger, told him to help. The rider closed his eyes for a moment. His journey had been long, his hope almost gone, but he was still human, and a human heart could not leave someone to die, even if she was not of his kind. He opened his eyes and looked at her once more. In the burning desert, under the endless sun, the lonely rider had found something that would change everything. A wounded alien girl, lying helpless in the sand, and he knew, without yet knowing why, that his life would never be the same. The rider stood over the strange girl, his shadow falling across her pale face. Her breathing was shallow, each breath a fight. The wound on her side was deep, and the sand around her was stained with dark blood. She was not like any person he had ever seen, yet she was not a monster either. She looked fragile, almost human, but something about her presence felt powerful. Her hair was silver, shining faintly even under the harsh sun. Her skin carried a glow as if light lived inside it. Her ears were long and sharp, her fingers thin like branches of a young tree. She seemed both broken and unearthly beautiful. The rider's horse shifted nervously, stamping its hoof against the sand. The animal did not want to stay close. It could feel the difference. It could feel that this girl was not of this world. The rider knelt down slowly, his hand hovering near her. He could see she was close to death. He touched the sand near her face and her eyelids moved slightly. Then her eyes opened just a little and the rider froze. Her eyes were bright, glowing like stars reflected in water. They were not human eyes, but they held pain and fear. Her lips parted and she whispered something. The sound was soft, broken, and in no language the rider knew. Yet the tone was clear. It was a plea, a cry for help. The rider felt his throat tighten. He had nothing to give, no water, no medicine, only his horse, his last companion. He looked at her wound again, and he knew she could not walk. She needed the horse, but if he gave it, what would become of him? The desert was endless. He would not survive on foot for long. The choice was heavy, and it pressed on his chest like a stone. He looked at her again, and in her glowing eyes he saw something he did not expect. It was not only pain, but also trust. Even though she was not of his kind, she looked at him as if she believed he could save he. The rider sat back for a moment, closing his eyes against the burning sun. His thoughts battled inside him. Fear said he should walk away. Kindness told him to stay. He remembered his past, the faces he had lost, the people who once showed him mercy. Perhaps this was his turn. He stood and took the reins of his horse. The animal pulled back, not wanting to approach, but the rider whispered calm words. He led the horse closer to the alien girl. The horse trembled, but obeyed. With gentle hands, the rider lifted the strange girl. She was light, lighter than he expected, as if her bones were hollow. She gasped in pain, her glowing eyes opening wider for a moment. Her lips moved again, speaking words he could not understand, but her hand gripped his arm weakly, as if to thank him. He placed her carefully on the back of his horse, securing her with an old rope. The horse shifted uneasily but stayed. The rider looked at the girl one last time, then let out a deep breath. He had given her his last horse, his only companion, his last hope of survival. Now he stood on the burning sand with only his own 2 feet. The horizon stretched endlessly before him. The girl leaned forward against the horse's neck, her silver hair falling across her face. Her glowing eyes closed again, but her breathing grew steadier. She was alive, because of him. The rider watched her, and for a moment he wondered what he had done. He had traded his own chance of survival for a stranger, for someone not even human. But deep inside, he felt it was the right choice. The desert wind blew softly, carrying away the silence. The sun dipped lower, and shadows stretched long. The rider began to walk, each step heavy. His horse carried the wounded alien girl into the horizon, while he followed slowly behind. He did not know what waited for him now, but he knew one thing with certainty. His life had crossed into a story larger than his own, and the desert would never be the same again. The rider walked through the desert with slow steps. Each grain of sand seemed heavier than before. For the first time, his horse walked ahead without him, carrying another, not him. The animal looked back often, as if confused, but it obeyed. The wounded alien girl leaned against its neck, her silver hair shining in the sunlight. The rider felt empty, as if he had given away a piece of his own soul. That horse was not just an animal. It was his last hope, his last weapon against the desert. Together they had survived storms, hunger, and nights of cold silence. Now he had nothing but his own 2 legs, and yet he had chosen to give it away. Why, he asked himself with every step. Why did he give his last gift? He did not know. He only knew he could not leave her to die. The girl stirred on the horse's back. Her glowing eyes opened weakly. She turned her head just enough to look at him. Her lips moved, forming sounds that were not his language, yet the tone carried meaning, gratitude, something soft and fragile. The rider nodded, though he did not understand her words. The desert stretched on, endless and cruel. The heat pressed against his back. The air burned his throat. His legs felt weak, but still he walked. The horse moved slower now, careful with its strange passenger. At times the rider stumbled, falling to one knee. His palms scraped against the hot sand. He looked up at the sky, searching for clouds, for any sign of rain. But the sky was clear, sharp, and merciless. He pushed himself back onto his feet, breathing hard. The alien girl watched him with heavy eyes. Her hand reached out weakly, trembling. She touched the horse's mane and then looked back at him, as if she understood the sacrifice he had made. Her gaze was not human, but it was full of something human hearts could still read. Respect. Hours passed. The rider's body screamed for rest. But he kept moving. His horse carried the girl, but he carried the weight of choice, a choice that would decide his fate. The sun began to fall, painting the desert in red and gold. Shadows stretched long and the air cooled. The rider finally stopped. His legs could not carry him further. He dropped to the ground, breathing hard. The horse stood nearby, lowering its head. The alien girl opened her eyes again. She whispered, the words broken and strange. Her voice was like wind through glass, soft but sharp. The rider did not understand, but her tone was gentle, almost like a song. Then something strange happened. Her glowing hand moved across her wound. Light spread from her palm, faint and flickering. The bleeding slowed. The wound seemed to close slightly. The rider stared, his tired eyes wide. He had never seen such power. She was healing herself, but at a cost. Her breathing grew faster, her body shaking. The rider took a step closer, worried, but then she stopped, falling silent. Her glow faded back to a dim shimmer. She had saved her life for now, but her strength was fading. The rider sat beside her, leaning against the warm body of his horse. He felt the weight of the desert pressing in. The stars began to appear above, one by one. The world grew darker, but quieter. He looked at her sleeping face, pale and strange, and wondered if she truly belonged to the stars. Perhaps she had fallen from them. Perhaps others were searching for her. His chest tightened at the thought. If they found her, would they find him too? Would they see him as an enemy or as the man who gave his last horse to save one of their own? The night grew colder, and he pulled his torn cloak around himself. He closed his eyes, though he knew sleep would not come easy. For the first time in many years, he felt fear not of the desert, but of what might follow. The horse breathed slowly beside them. The alien girl's chest rose and fell with weak rhythm, and the rider sat awake, alone with his thoughts. He had given away his last gift. And his survival was no longer his own. It was tied to a stranger from the stars. And deep inside, he felt the desert itself was watching, waiting, as if the land knew his choice had opened a path that could not be closed. The desert changed when the sun went down. The fire of the day gave way to the cold breath of night. Shadows stretched across the land, long and sharp. The stars above burned brighter than candles, covering the sky like endless, watchful eyes. The rider sat near the horse, his cloak pulled tight around his shoulders. The alien girl lay across the animal's back, resting, her faint glow lighting the air around her like soft moonlight. Her breathing was uneven but stronger than before. He looked at her and then at the empty horizon. Something about the silence felt heavier than usual. It was not the silence of peace, but of waiting. The horse shifted its hooves nervously. Its ears twitched at sounds the rider could not hear. The desert was alive at night, but tonight it felt different. The rider sensed it too, as if unseen eyes were fixed on them. He stood and walked a few steps away. His boots crunched on the cold sand. He scanned the darkness. His hand rested on the old weapon at his side, a blade worn from use. He had carried it for years, though he rarely drew it anymore. The wind whispered low across the rocks, carrying a sound he could not name, not an animal, not the shifting of sand. It was almost like a voice, distant and broken. The rider froze, his heart pounded. He turned toward the horse. The alien girl's glowing eyes were open, staring at him. She seemed to know what he felt. Her lips moved, but the words were faint, foreign. The sound trembled in the night. It was not a warning, but it made his blood run cold. The rider walked back to her side. He placed his hand on the horse to calm it. He looked into her strange eyes, trying to read. Yad them. She pointed weakly toward the east, her fingers glowing faintly in the dark. He followed her gesture, but saw nothing at first. Only dunes and rocks, all silver under the moon. Then he noticed movement. A shadow shifted, too steady to be wind. The rider's breath caught. He whispered to himself, but the desert swallowed his words. Slowly, the shadow faded again, melting into the dark. He rubbed his eyes, wondering if he had imagined it, but deep inside, he knew he had not. He returned to the horse and sat down, his blade resting across his knees. His eyes did not close. Sleep was a luxury he could not risk. Not tonight. The alien girl reached out with trembling fingers, touching his sleeve. Her hand was weak, but her touch burned with strange warmth. She whispered again, her words like music twisted by wind. He did not understand, but he felt the meaning. She wanted him to stay awake, to be ready. He nodded slowly, his jaw set. He had been ready for death many times before, but this felt different. This felt like a test he did not yet understand. Hours passed. The stars shifted slowly. The cold grew sharper. He could see his breath in the night air. The silence stretched, unbroken except by the restless movement of the horse. Then, as the horizon began to soften with the first gray light of dawn, the wind stopped completely. No whisper, no sound. Even the horse froze, its ears forward, eyes wide. The rider's skin prickled, his hand tightened around his blade. He looked east again, and this time he saw them. Figures stood against the early light, tall and silent. Their shapes were sharp, their movements smooth. They did not walk like men. They stood still, watching. The alien girl stirred, her glowing eyes opening wide. Her lips parted, and though her voice was broken, one word escaped clear. A word the rider understood. "Sisters," she whispered. He rider's heart hammered. The silent night had given way to a silent dawn, and he knew the desert was no longer empty. The first light of dawn spilled across the desert, painting the sand in gray and gold. The rider squinted against the brightness. His tired eyes searched the horizon where the tall figures had stood. But now, the place was empty. Only the long dunes and silent rocks remained. Had they been real, or only shadows born from exhaustion? He turned to the alien girl, still weak on the horse. Her glowing eyes closed again, as if she had no strength to answer. The rider felt unease spreading through his chest. He could not shake the memory of those shapes, tall and silent. Their presence had been too sharp, too heavy to be imagination. When the sun climbed higher, he rose to his feet and began walking again. His legs were heavy, but the need to keep moving was stronger. The desert showed no mercy, and standing still was death. The horse followed slowly, carrying the girl with care. Her silver hair shifted in the breeze, her pale glow dim but steady. The rider glanced at her often, wondering who she truly was and what kind of beings had watched them in silence. After some hours, he stopped. Something in the sand caught his eye. He crouched low, brushing the dust with his hand. What he saw made his blood run cold. Footprints. Not human footprints. Not animal either. They were long and narrow, pressed deep into the sand as if the weight behind them was great. The edges were sharp, the shape unfamiliar, and there were many of them, leading across the desert in winding lines. The rider's throat tightened. He touched the mark again, testing it. The print was fresh, too fresh. Whoever or whatever had made it had passed not long before. He stood and looked around. His eyes scanned the dunes. Every shift of sand seemed alive now. Every shadow seemed ready to move. The horse snorted uneasily, its ears flicking back and forth. The alien girl stirred, her eyes opening slightly. And she followed his gaze, and her lips moved. A whisper came, soft but filled with urgency. Though he could not understand the words, he understood the fear. She knew. She knew what had left those prints. The rider pressed his lips together. His heart beat faster. He felt the old instinct of survival rise inside him. He wanted to turn back, to run. But there was no place to run to. The desert stretched endless in all directions. He continued forward, but each step felt heavier. Each time the wind brushed the sand, he thought he heard footsteps. Each time a shadow moved, he thought it was them. As the day dragged on, he found more signs. A broken piece of metal, half buried in the dust, sharp and strange, not like human craft. It hummed faintly when he touched it, as if alive. He dropped it quickly, wiping his hands on his cloak. The alien girl watched him, her glowing eyes full of warning. She whispered again, louder this time. Her voice cracked with fear. She pointed toward the prince, then toward the horizon. Her meaning was clear. Something was coming. The rider's jaw tightened. He placed his hand on the horse's neck, steadying it. He knew he had to stay calm. If he lost control, the horse would panic and the girl would fall. The desert wind rose suddenly, lifting swirls of sand into the air. The rider shielded his eyes. His cloak whipped against his legs. Through the haze, he thought he saw movement again. Tall shadows, too steady to be tricks of light. When the wind died, the desert returned to silence, but the silence was worse than the storm. It was the silence of hunters, waiting. The rider knelt once more by the strange prints. He pressed his hand into the sand beside them. His hand looked small compared to the mark. He whispered to himself, his voice low, not human. The alien girl's eyes met his. She nodded faintly, though her face was pale with acness. She understood what he had seen. As the sun fell lower and the sky bled red, the rider felt the weight of choice again. He had no horse, no water, no shelter. Only a wounded stranger and the endless desert. And now, something else was out there, watching, leaving marks in the dust. He rose slowly, his blade heavy in his hand. He looked at the horizon where the prince led, and his chest tightened. The desert was no longer just sand and silence. It was a path of signs, warnings written in dust. And each step forward was pulling him closer to whatever waited at the end. The night returned with heavy silence. The rider sat close to the horse, his blade resting across his knees. He had not slept since the day he found the alien girl. His body ached, but his mind refused to close its eyes. The desert had become a place of whispers, and he could not ignore them. The alien girl lay weak upon the horse. Her silver hair glowed faintly in the dark, her breath shallow but steady. From time to time she stirred, her glowing eyes opening only for a moment. Then she would close them again, as if saving her strength. The rider stared at the strange prints he had found earlier. The marks haunted him. They were fresh and too many. Whoever made them had not gone far. He felt the truth in his bones. Something was watching, something waiting. The stars burned above, cold and endless. The desert wind rose and fell, carrying strange sounds. Sometimes it was a whistle, sometimes it was a hum. It was not the sound of nature, it was the sound of something alive, something foreign. As the night stretched on, the rider's thoughts grew heavier. His eyes kept returning to the girl. Why had he given her his last horse? Why had he tied his fate to hers? He could not answer, yet deep inside, he knew it was the only choice he could have made. Then, just before dawn, he heard it, a sound unlike the others. It was soft, almost gentle, a low humming that rose and fell like a song. It came from nowhere, and yet from everywhere. The rider froze, every muscle. He tense. The horse lifted its head, ears flicking, nostrils wide. The alien girl opened her glowing eyes. She turned toward the sound. Her lips moved, whispering words in her strange language. The rider did not understand, but her tone was clear. She knew this song. The sound grew louder, wrapping around the air. It was not frightening, but it carried weight. It felt like a voice calling across time and distance. The desert seemed to listen. the sand itself holding its breath. The rider's skin prickled. He gripped his blade tighter, his eyes searched the horizon. The first light of dawn began to touch the sky, painting it with pale silver. Against the rising glow, he saw movement, figures. At first they were only shapes, blurred by the haze of the desert, but as the light grew, their forms sharpened, tall, graceful, moving with silent steps. They did not stumble as humans did on sand. Their presence was smooth, almost like drifting shadows. The rider's heart pounded in his chest. His mouth was dry. He had seen them before, at night, only as silhouettes. Now they were real, walking closer. The alien girl's breath quickened. She whispered one word he could almost understand, a word filled with both fear and longing. Sisters. The rider's blood ran cold. He looked at her, then at the figures. There were 3 of them, tall and silent. Their hair shone like her own, silver in the dawn. Their eyes glowed faintly. Their faces were beautiful, but hard, carved with strength. They stopped at a distance, watching him. The desert fell silent again. Not even the wind moved. The rider felt their gaze heavy upon him, sharp as blades. He knew this was no ordinary meeting. This was judgment. The alien girl raised her hand weakly toward them. Her voice cracked as she called to them. The sisters did not move. They stood still, their glowing eyes fixed on the rider. He tightened his grip on the blade. His legs felt weak. He did not know if they saw him as friend or enemy. He did not know if giving his horse had saved him or doomed him. The humming sound faded into silence. The dawn spread across the desert, painting everything in gold, and in that silence, the rider understood. His life was no longer his own. The next step would belong to them. The desert stood frozen under the rising sun. The rider held his blade tight, his knuckles white. Across the sand, 3 tall figures moved closer, silent as shadows. Their silver hair caught the dawn light, their glowing eyes fixed on him. They stopped a few steps away, standing in a half circle. Their faces were beautiful, but cold, carved like stone. They did not blink, they did not speak, they only stared, as if weighing his soul. The rider's heart pounded. He had faced men with guns, he had fought hunger, storms, and nights of loneliness, but never had he felt a silence this sharp. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of judgment. The horse shifted nervously, its hooves pawed at the sand. The alien girl stirred on its back. Her glowing eyes opened weakly. She saw them, and her lips trembled. She whispered one word again, "Sisters." The 3 figures reacted. Their glowing eyes softened, but only for a moment. Then they turned their gaze back to the rider. They did not rush to the girl. They did not run to her side. Instead, they stood still, watching him. The rider took a slow breath. He lowered his blade, though he did not release it completely. His voice broke the silence, rough and tired. "She was dying," he said. "I gave her my horse." The sisters exchanged brief looks. Their faces remained hard, but something flickered in their eyes. The tallest among them stepped forward. Her movements were smooth, as if the sand itself carried her. She stopped close enough for him to see the fine lines of her face, too perfect, too sharp. When she spoke, her voice was low, broken, but clear enough for him to understand. Why? One word, simple, heavy. It struck him harder than a blade. He swallowed. His throat was dry. "Because she needed it," he answered. His words were simple, but his voice carried the weight of truth. The sister tilted her head. Her glowing eyes studied him. Behind her, the other 2 shifted slightly, their hair shining in the light. The rider felt their power, not in weapons, but in presence. The alien girl lifted her hand weakly from the horse, reaching toward them. Her voice cracked as she spoke in their language. The sound was strange and musical, filled with pain and longing. The sisters listened, their eyes softening at last. The tallest one stepped past the rider, her silver cloak brushing against him without sound. She approached the girl and touched her glowing hand. A light passed between them, faint but warm. The girl's breathing steadied, her glow brightened slightly. The rider let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. He lowered his blade completely, letting it hang at his side. For a moment, he thought they had forgotten him. But then the second sister turned to him, her eyes narrowed, sharp as fire. "You gave," she said slowly, her words broken but clear. "You gave what was last." The rider nodded once. He had no strength for speeches. He had only truth. "Yes," he said. The sisters looked at one another, silent. The desert wind picked up, brushing sand around their feet. None of them moved. The air was thick with meaning. Finally, the tallest sister spoke again, her voice softer this time. "Human," she said. Her glowing hand touched the wounded girl's face gently. Then her eyes returned to him. "Your choice is wait." The rider did not fully understand, but he felt the power of her words. He felt the truth in them. The sisters stepped back, forming their half-circle again. Their glowing eyes never left him. They did not strike, they did not threaten. But their silence told him he had become part of something far larger than himself. The desert stretched wide and endless, but for the first time the rider felt it closing in. He was no longer only a man with a horse, no longer only a survivor. He was the one who had given his last gift to a stranger from the stars, and now her sisters had arrived, silent, watchful, and full of judgment. The desert morning grew brighter, but the air was still heavy. The rider stood in silence, his blade at his side. Across from him, the three sisters surrounded their wounded kin. Their silver hair shone in the light, their glowing eyes sharp. They did not speak quickly, as humans did. They watched, they studied, every small movement. The rider felt their judgment like a weight pressing down. He had faced storms, hunger, and battles, but this was different. These women were not ordinary beings. Their silence carried more power than an army. The wounded girl, still weak on the horse, whispered in her strange language. Her voice cracked but urgent. The sisters leaned close to listen, their faces softened, their eyes glowing with faint warmth. For a moment, the rider saw love between them, true and unbroken. But when their attention turned back to him, the warmth faded. The tallest sister stepped forward again, her face unreadable, her voice cut through the air, slow and careful. "You gave," she said. "But why?" The rider swallowed hard. His throat was dry, his voice rough. "Because she needed it," he answered. "Because she would have died." The second sister's eyes narrowed. Her gaze was sharp enough to pierce through his chest. "You lose," she said, her words broken but clear. "Your horse, your life, your way." The rider lowered his eyes for a moment. He felt the truth in her words. He had given away the last of what he had. The price was real. His survival was now hanging by a thread. Still, he lifted his head, his voice firm though soft. "What I gave was not only a horse," he said. "It was hope. She lives because of it." The sisters did not answer. The desert wind blew around them, carrying dust in small swirls. Their glowing eyes burned into him. Then the youngest sister, who had not spoken yet, stepped forward. She was smaller than the others, but her gaze was no less sharp. She pointed at him with a glowing finger. Her voice was like a whisper carried on the wind. "Human heart," she said, "strong but foolish." The rider felt the words cut deep. He knew they were true. He had acted not with wisdom but with compassion, and in this desert, compassion could kill. But then, something unexpected happened. The wounded girl weakly lifted her hand toward him. Her glowing fingers trembled. Her voice was soft, but her tone clear. She spoke words he could not understand, but the meaning touched him. She was defending him. The sisters turned their eyes to her, their faces unreadable. The tallest one closed her eyes for a moment as if listening to something deeper. Then she looked back at him, her voice lower now. "Her life, tied to yours," she said. "Her survival, your price." The rider's chest tightened. He understood. His kindness had bound him to her fate. Whatever happened to her would also decide his own. The second sister stepped closer. She stopped just in front of him, so near he could see the faint light beneath her skin. She raised her hand, placing it gently on his chest. The touch was cold and hot at the same time. A shock ran through him. His heart raced. Her glowing eyes met his. "Choice is weight," she whispered, "and weight must be carried." The rider felt as if the desert itself pressed into him. He staggered back, clutching his chest, his heart hammered, but inside, he felt something strange. A mark, unseen but burning, had been placed upon him. The sisters stepped back in unison, their glowing eyes watching him. Their silence was no longer empty. It was filled with meaning. The rider breathed hard, his body shaking. He had given his last gift, but the price was not only survival, the price was deeper, binding him to a story he could not escape. And as the sisters stood against the blazing sun, their silver hair flowing in the wind, the rider knew one truth. His kindness had saved a life, but it had also changed his own forever. The desert sun climbed higher, its light cutting across the sand like fire. The rider stood weak but unbroken. His chest still burned where the sister's glowing hand had touched him. He felt something inside, a weight, an invisible mark he could not shake. The three sisters stood tall, silver hair flowing in the hot wind. Their glowing eyes stayed fixed on him, sharp, unreadable. The wounded alien girl leaned against the horse, her breath uneven but steady. She watched everything with silent trust. The rider waited for their judgment. He had no strength left to fight, no words left to defend himself. He had already given the only thing he had, his last horse. He thought they might strike him down or abandon him to the desert. But instead, the tallest sister stepped forward. Her movements were smooth, almost floating. She reached out her glowing hand and rested it lightly on his shoulder. For a moment, the rider froze. his body tense, his blade heavy in his hand. Then warmth spread from her touch, not burning but calm. It sank into his skin, into his chest, into his very bones. His breath steadied, the pain in his legs eased, his exhaustion faded slightly, like a fire rekindled in dying coals. The sister's glowing eyes met his. Her voice was low, steady. "Silent gift," she said. "Return for return." The rider did not understand fully, but he felt it. She was giving something back. Not words, not promises, but a gift beyond sight. A strength not his own now flowed in his blood. The second sister raised her hand as well. She touched his forehead briefly. Her touch was cooler, sharper, but it filled his mind with clarity. The haze of exhaustion lifted. His thoughts became sharp. Ain. The desert no longer blurred before his eyes. The youngest sister came last. She did not touch him. Instead, she raised her glowing hand to the sky. Her voice whispered words in their strange language. The air itself seemed to tremble. The desert wind stilled. For a heartbeat, the world held silence deeper than death. Then it was gone. The sisters lowered their hands, stepping back. Their glowing eyes watched him, measuring, judging still. But something had changed. He no longer felt like prey. He felt marked, chosen. The alien girl on the horse stirred. Her glowing eyes met his. She whispered softly. Her tone was weak but filled with meaning. The rider could not understand her words, yet the warmth in her gaze told him the truth. She knew what her sisters had done. She knew they had spared him, given him something rare. The rider touched his chest, still burning faintly. He felt stronger, yet uncertain. Why would they give him such a gift? He had only been a stranger, a wanderer who offered kindness. Now he was tied to them, bound by something larger than choice. The tallest sister finally spoke again, her voice carried across the sand. "Kindness is weight," she said, "but gift is bond." The rider nodded slowly. He did not pretend to understand, but he felt the truth behind the words. He had given away his last horse. They had given him something greater in return, not mercy, but connection. The sisters turned back toward the horizon. Their silver hair gleamed in the sun. The alien girl whispered to them again, and they listened. Their faces softened, then hardened once more. They looked at the rider one last time, their silence filled with meaning. He stood still, his cloak flapping in the desert wind, his blade at his side, his body carrying a strange new strength. And in his heart, he knew this moment was not an ending, but a beginning. The sisters had given him a silent gift, a bond he could not break, a strength he could not return. And as they stood together under the burning sun, the rider realized the desert would never see him the same again. The sun climbed higher over the desert. Its light spread across the endless dunes, turning the land into waves of gold. The rider stood still, his cloak torn, his body weary, but something inside him had changed. His chest still burned faintly where the sisters had touched him, their silent gift now a part of his blood. The three alien sisters gathered close to the wounded girl. Their silver hair shimmered in the wind. They spoke in their strange language, their voices like songs of glass. The girl on the horse answered weakly. Her eyes glowed with soft light. Her words carried love, relief, and pain. The rider stepped back, giving them space. He felt like an intruder in something holy, yet he could not look away. He had given his last horse, his last hope, and now he was bound to their story. The tallest sister turned her gaze toward him again, her glowing eyes calm but unshakable. She raised her hand in a gesture he did not understand, not greeting, not warning, something in between. The rider felt the weight of her look, a weight heavier than sand. "You walk alone," she said slowly, her words broken but clear, but no longer empty. The rider did not answer. His throat was dry, his heart heavy, yet he felt the truth. He was no longer empty. His choice had tied him to something greater, something beyond his own survival. The sisters turned together. Their steps were silent. They lifted the wounded girl gently from the horse, carrying her with care. The rider thought they would take the horse as well, but instead they left it. The animal stood trembling, but alive. Its eyes followed the sisters with confusion. The rider touched the horse's neck, relief rushing through him. It was thin, tired, but it was his again. His last gift had returned, though changed. The price had been paid, and something else had been given in return. The sisters moved across the desert like shadows of light. Their feet left no sound, no mark. Their silver hair streamed in the wind. The rider watched them go, his chest aching with questions. Who were they? Where had they come from? Would he ever see them again? When they reached the horizon, they stopped once. The tallest sister turned her head slightly. Her glowing eyes met his one final time. She spoke no word, but her silence carried meaning. Then they vanished into the rising sun, their forms melting into the light. The rider stood alone once more. The desert stretched around him, endless and silent. The horse breathed beside him, the wind whispered low, yet the air was no longer empty. It carried weight, memory, promise. He looked down at his hand, still trembling from the touch of their light. He felt stronger, not in body, but in spirit. He had given everything and received something he could not name. The desert would remember this day. The story of a man who gave his last horse to a wounded stranger. The story of sisters who came in silence at dawn. The story of gifts exchanged, not in words, but in choices. The rider pulled his cloak tighter and began to walk again. The desert stretched wide before him, but he no longer feared its silence. He knew now that every step carried meaning, that even a lonely man could change the fate of more than himself. Behind him lay footprints in the sand. Ahead of him stretched a horizon without end. But within him, a legend had begun. A story carried not by words, but by the weight of kindness, by the price of choice. And though no song had been sung, no banner raised, the desert had already written his tale, a tale whispered by wind, carried by stars, remembered by silence. The rider walked on, and the legend began.